Hello Internet and welcome to another tutorial video for Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. In this episode we will be going over the default layout for the main game screen and touch on how you can tweak it to your liking. I'll explain the most important parts of the UI and hopefully we will get you understanding what you're looking at. Now ideally at this point you have created a new world and a character following my previous tutorials. Odds are good that you load in and find yourself in the evac shelter, possibly for the first time ever. You're probably standing in the dark and maybe there's an NPC nearby. So let's work with that. First off, you've got the main display. This section of the screen shows you the game world including your character at the center. When your character moves, you remain in the center of the screen, but the world around you will shift. The deep blackness that you can see here are unexplored and unseen tiles. This means that you don't know what is there. If I move around a bit, you will see that some tiles are gray here and some are sepia. Now sepia means that you have seen those tiles recently but you don't currently have any vision on them. Over time you will forget these remembered tiles and you'll have to re-explore them. These gray tiles are tiles that my character can currently see but they are in darkness. If I move to the curtains and open them, you can see that the light illuminates nearby tiles. The tiles that I can see and are lit up are in full color. Now that's the basics of this main screen. You will be looking at this a lot and you will see furniture and monsters and items. There are hundreds of sprites in the game. Obviously we're not going to go over everything that we see here. I'm currently using the Ultica tile set, which we discussed in our tile set video. You'll learn the sprites as you go, and in Ultica at least many of the tiles look like what they are. But depending on your tile set, there may be additional indicators that will appear over objects or even the player character. For instance, Ultica has an indicator that pops up over the player's head when you shift to sprinting or crouching. Corpses that will eventually reanimate have their own indicator, and some status effects will appear over the player's head, such as when you're bleeding. These little pop-ups are extremely valuable and I would highly recommend that you keep an eye on them, though it's pretty hard to miss something that's overlaid directly above your character. Monsters in this tile set will also have an exclamation point next to them when they can see you, and that's a pretty important one for you to remember. The weather in the game will also sometimes be overlaid across this main screen. This usually only occurs when the rain or snowfall is significant. We get a lot of what they call micro rain, which will not display the precipitation overlay. And additionally, the sun does rise and set, which will lead to your vision either constricting or expanding depending on the amount of light that you see. Man, there's a lot to talk about, I guess. There's probably a few more niche things that we could talk about, but those are the main things that you're going to notice and are important for your very first game. But anyway, that's what this main section of the screen is. It displays your character and the world around you. Depending on what your character does, menus will also pop up in this space. Now some of these menus will appear in the center. Most menus in the game will appear in the center of the screen. However, some will appear in the top left or in other locations. You'll learn where they are as you go. Regardless, however, this main section of the screen will always be there unless you're in some sort of a menu. If I open the map screen, for instance, it will take me to the map screen and remove this view. But this is your character and their view of the world around them. Now on the right side of the screen, you will see what we refer to as the sidebar. Your sidebar will look a little bit different than what is displayed here. I've set this up to be how it normally looks for me when I personally play the game. This is a very customizable element of the game and you can set things up however you like. So let's talk about how to edit this and what I think are the most important panels in the sidebar. Now to see information about the sidebar and customize it to your liking, you will press the closing curly brace key on your keyboard. It looks like this and is located on the same key as the closing square bracket. Pressing this will open a new menu. Now on the left we have individual elements of the sidebar. We'll talk about the important parts here in a moment. And on the right side you will see a list of preset layouts. You can move from the left column to the right by using the arrow keys. Now as of this recording, I believe that labels is the default layout. However, I in my personal play use classic, and that's what I'll have set up for most of this tutorial series. Now I'm extremely biased, I know, and you can use whatever you want to use, but I find it hard to look at anything other than my preferred layout after, I don't know, like a billion hours of this game. And again, you can customize this however you want, and if you want to play with labels, then go nuts. It's also worth noting that I have everything scaled up about 25% for the purposes of this tutorial, mostly to make things more visible for mobile users. So my sidebar will probably be much larger than what yours will look like. If size is a concern for you, you should check out the compact sidebar layout. It's generally thinner and less obtrusive. Now on the left side of this menu, you can press Tab to enable or disable each individual element. Grayed out elements are not currently displayed, but white elements are. Pressing S allows you to move an element in the sidebar so you can shuffle things up or down depending on what you want it to look like. You can move them up and down using the arrow keys and then press S again to set the element in the new location. And now here comes the tricky part of this tutorial. Each default layout for sidebars is different. Some of them have panels that don't exist at all in the other sidebar layouts. Some layouts also combine multiple elements into one panel, but if you switch to a different layout, it might break them into individual pieces. For instance, on the classic layout, my health panel actually displays more than just my HP. If I remove it, you'll see that other things disappear as well. Now, because of this difference between each layout, talking about each line individually would be pretty tricky. So instead, I'm just going to show you my own layout, and we're going to talk about which parts of the sidebar I think should always be enabled regardless of what you choose. Sorry if that's not as in-depth as you would like it to be, but I really could not think of a better way to do this, so this is what we're going with. So again, this is the sidebar layout that I use in my personal play. I'm using the classic layout, and it's pretty much displaying all of the default stuff. Now, some of this information is more important than others though, so let's talk about which I use the most. Alrighty, the main things that I look at in this sidebar are the hit point display, my stamina bar, the in-game time, my message log, and the minimap. There's other important information here that is situationally useful, but these are the things that I feel are a must-have no matter what your sidebar layout displays. Now the stamina bar, the current time, and the minimap, as far as I know, do not appear anywhere else in game. This makes them a must-have on the sidebar because you would not otherwise be able to get that information. Then regarding our message log, people ask a lot about how to make this log bigger. You can actually collapse your minimap, which in most default layouts will expand the log. You do this by pressing the capital N key to toggle the minimap. This is nice if you need to just see a few extra lines on the log than what is currently displayed. Alternatively, you can press the capital P key to show your complete list of previous messages. If you're interested, there are also options in the setting menu that allow you to change how long messages are kept or displayed before fading out. In general though, the default values are perfectly fine for most players. In-game time is important to know for exploring and timing your sleep cycle. If you have a time-telling item like a cell phone or watch in your inventory, then the exact time will be displayed here. But if you don't have such an item, then your menu will offer an approximation of the current time. This is a bit of a confusing display, but I believe it just shows you where in the sky the sun currently exists. Watches and phones are really easy to come by though, and most of the time you're going to know the exact time of day. And then let's talk about our stamina bar. Now this is a simple bar, but again, I don't know anywhere else in the game that you can actually see this. Managing your stamina is incredibly important in Cataclysm, especially if you're in melee combat, and ignoring this will 100% get you killed, so I highly recommend that you leave this enabled. As you use stamina, this bar will deplete, and depending on your sound pack, there may also be sound effects at different thresholds. We'll talk about stamina in detail when we get to combat. Just know that this is an incredibly important thing, and do not disable this display. On this note as well, the Weariness Display is a pretty recent addition to the game, but it's pretty valuable. I personally think you should keep that on here somewhere, but it's a little less important than some of the other elements. We'll talk about weariness in its own video probably, and we'll discuss this more in that episode. Now let's move on to the less valuable information. Now seeing your speed can be useful. Here we can see our current speed on the left. Next to it we see how many moves our last action took, again situationally useful. The letter here reflects which movement mode we're currently using, either walking, crouching, or running. That said, it's not really something you're going to be looking at in every play session. Most of the tile sets have indicators over the player for when you're crouching or sprinting, so there's usually an extra visual cue for your current movement mode. The lighting line here displays how bright your current tile is. Now this is not super reliable, we'll have to talk about this at some point. Cataclysm manages lighting in a strange way, but it's helpful at a glance to know how dark the square you're in actually is. I'd keep this one as well, mostly because I don't really know where else you can see this in a game. Almost everything else though in the sidebar, that they can go. If you're trying to cut a lot of things out, most of these are not valuable. I don't find the compass particularly useful. It just displays names of enemies that you can see and their general direction. There are better ways to pinpoint where an enemy is though, so I don't really use this very much. Specifically, this would be the capital V menu, which you can tab between showing enemies or items. This allows you to quickly see where an enemy is with their current distance and a dotted line that draws back to your player so you know which direction they're in. Displaying your current weapon or the weather or the stage of the moon, they're really not things that come up very often, so you can cut those if you want to. Now, unfortunately, changing the width of the sidebar is not really possible aside from choosing a default layout that is smaller. Now, there is an option in settings that allows you to change your minimap height. Sometimes this is necessary when things aren't lined up the way you want them to be, and this can also eke out just a little extra space in your sidebar depending on your layout. In fact, there are a variety of things that you can do in there to customize your minimap. Feel free to tweak them to your liking. Settings are all pretty self-explanatory, and honestly, most of them are just cosmetic. And I think we'll wrap the episode there. Honestly, the main thing here is just the stuff I've already mentioned as being important. I really wish I could go over every single setting one at a time and really dive into whether or not they're valuable. But that would be a very long video, and as I said, there are so many differences between the layouts that that's just not really feasible. But hopefully at this point you have some idea of what is most valuable to have in your sidebar display. And again, feel free to play with things. I mean, it's highly customizable. It's a relatively recent addition to Cataclysm, so many users don't even know that they can do this. Anyway, I hope this video helped. Thank you for watching. I of course will be back with more tutorial content in the near future, and I'll see you in the next video.